Curtis Mayfield was once the soul of the protest soul movement. He was the man who wrote songs powerful enough to make an entire generation rise up and take to the streets. He became a symbol of hope, justice, and resilience in a fractured society. But the house where he spent his final years now, dusty, locked and forgotten, held a detail no one expected. In the attic among moldy boxes, a stack of scholarship records from the 1960s was discovered. It showed that 770 students had once been supported by a fund quietly backed by Mayfield himself. But the final pages were charred. One last handwritten note sparked enduring curiosity. Who cut the funding in silence? It wasn't just a clue to something hidden. It hinted at a betrayal that had lasted for decades, and Mayfield may have been its silent victim. In this video, we will explore the journey of his career, the quiet fractures behind the spotlight, the pain he endured after his spine was shattered on a stage, and the death that carried away secrets no one dared to mention. This is the story of a man who turned suffering into music and who was later abandoned by the very causes he once gave voice to. A voice born in gunfire. Curtis Mayfield was born on June 3rd, 1942, inside a cramped, suffocating apartment in Cabrini Green, Chicago. It was a place where gunshots, prayers, and neighbors' arguments blended into the background music of poverty. The room was tight. A dim light seeped through a dirty window, and the smell of old sweat lingered on the worn-out blanket. In that heavy air, a faint cry was heard. Curtis was born weighing just over 5 pounds, thin and pale, in the arms of his mother, Marion Washington. She was a woman with firm eyes and a heart filled with scars his father left before Curtis turned 1. There was no farewell, no letter, only debt, broken promises, and a home stripped of any trace of a man. Marion raised 5 children on her own, surviving day by day with laundry work, dishwashing, and any job that could bring a little food and heating. At the age of 7, Curtis walked into a Baptist church. His voice, rising from a fragile frame, silenced the congregation. People cried. Curtis whispered, "I was born to sing." He learned guitar on a rusty instrument given by a neighbor no one taught him. He learned by instinct, by faith, and by a desire to escape the iron cage of the Cabrini Green. He made himself a promise. One day, someone would hear this voice, and his mother would no longer have to beg the landlord for a few extra days to pay the rent. But life was unforgiving. One night, in December 1954, 12-year-old Curtis was attacked in a dark alley simply for carrying a loaf of bread his mother had packed. They left him curled up in the cold. From that night came a song, his first hymn, written about light within darkness. Curtis didn't cry. He wrote. He didn't complain. He sang. Music became the only shield he had against poverty, injustice, and fear. Curtis left school at 14 and joined The Impressions, a humble R&B group. Soon, he turned them into the voice of a generation. People Get Ready was not just a song. It was a prayer without a church, a hymn without scripture. Martin Luther King Jr. called it the anthem of the movement. In a time when black people were being murdered in the streets and justice was buried behind courtroom doors, Curtis chose not rage but melody. Keep on pushing. This Is My Country and Choice of Colors were each a blade, slicing through America's racial divide. But Curtis didn't promote violence. He did something more dangerous. He made people think. During performances, he would often pause mid-song to share stories. A father fired because of his skin color. A child coming home from school with no desk to sit at. People said, Curtis didn't write music. He wrote history with melody. Every lyric was a cry from the throat of a people gasping for air. In a decade of unrest, as America trembled under protest, Curtis Mayfield was the voice that made people stop. Not because he shouted louder than the rest, but because he sang at the exact moment no one else dared to speak, exposing the truth and the price paid. In 1972, Curtis Mayfield released the soundtrack album Superfly within weeks. It not only climbed to the #1 spot on the Billboard charts, but also became a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just music, it was a declaration. Curtis exposed street life, called out those who used drugs to control the poor, and criticized the indifference of the social system. While Hollywood was busy commercializing the image of black people through the blaxploitation genre, Curtis did the opposite. He told the truth. But truth always comes at a cost. The success of Superfly made Curtis a target, both within the industry and within his own community. Some praised him as a prophet. Others accused him of revealing too many things that were better left unsaid. Fame brought wealth. Mansions, luxury cars, it also brought pressure to maintain an image. Curtis, once the voice of justice and hope, was now expected to be the perfect symbol for a movement that was beginning to tremble. Every song he wrote was dissected, analyzed, and pushed to be more positive, less political. Friendlier to the media, in an interview he said, "I'm not a preacher. I'm just someone who sees something wrong and can't stay silent." And then the cruelest thing happened. The very people who once cheered for him began to turn away. Record labels applied a pressure. The media distorted his message, and the community, which once saw him as a hero, began to label him too radical, too serious, too political. Curtis did not collapse, but he began to withdraw. He declined many major performance invitations and ran his own label, Curtis Records, to protect his creative control. But the price of freedom was isolation. In the cutthroat music industry, a black artist who dared to speak truth was not welcomed for long. Superfly was a creative peak, but also the moment everything began to crack. Curtis saw it in the eyes of producers, in the conditional offers from major labels, and in himself, a man who once believed music could save the world. Now, just hoping it could be enough to save him from being forgotten. A broken spine, a life broken. In May of 1987, the lights in a Chicago recording studio dimmed as Curtis, then 44 years old, collapsed during a session. His body was drenched in sweat, his vision blurred. His guitar hit the floor as he fell. Musicians rushed to help him up, but in a dazed state, Curtis still managed a weak smile and insisted he just needed a short break. The hospital tests delivered devastating news. Type 2 diabetes had been silently destroying his body. The illness left him exhausted and unable to stand for more than 30 minutes at a time. Diabetes is a silent and relentless enemy. One night, in July 1988, at a small club in Detroit, Curtis felt dizzy while performing. He stopped singing and sat down on the stage, pretending it was part of the act. The audience didn't notice, but Altha, standing backstage, wept as she watched him struggle. Curtis kept his illness hidden from the public, He didn't want pity, but his body was no longer listening to him one morning. In January 1990, while having breakfast in Atlanta, Curtis suddenly lost feeling in his left hand. His plate fell to the floor. Doctors warned that diabetes was destroying his nerves. If left unchecked, he could lose the ability to play guitar, the one thing that had connected him to the world. In silent panic, Curtis held Altha's hand and whispered that he would fight. But deep down, he knew this battle would be brutal. On August the 13th, 1990, the sky over Brooklyn was dark and heavy wind howled through Wingate Field. As if a warning, Curtis, then 48 years old, was preparing for an outdoor performance. By 5 p.m., the wind picked up in violent bursts, hurling dust and leaves onto the stage. The metal rig holding the lights began to creak with unsettling groans. Despite weather warnings, the show went on. 10,000 tickets had already been sold. Curtis stepped onto the stage at 7:05 p.m., wearing his familiar smile, his guitar slung across his shoulder. The crowd cheered, unaware that tragedy was seconds away. As he strummed the opening notes of People Get Ready, a gust of wind reaching 60 kilometers per hour tore through the field. A sharp, chilling crack sliced the air. The metal lighting rig, weighing over 450 kilograms, came crashing down, collapsing directly onto Curtis. His guitar shattered beside him, strings snapping like exposed wounds. Altha, just 10 meters away, ran toward him, screaming his name in the chaos. It took rescue teams 15 minutes to lift the rig. Every second felt like a blade through her heart. Curtis was rushed to Kings County Hospital in critical condition. On August 14, 1990, doctors announced the diagnosis. He had broken 3 cervical vertebrae. His spinal cord was severely damaged. He was paralyzed from the neck down, unable to move, play music, or breathe. Without assistance, Altha collapsed to the ground, sobbing as if the world had ended. The following weeks were hell. Curtis lay motionless in a sterile hospital room in New York, the only sign of life left in his body, flickering through his eyes, which burned with silent pain. Diabetes slowed his recovery. Infections took hold. On October 3rd, 1990, Curtis struggled to breathe. His chest tightened. Nurses rushed in with machines, their noise drowning out Altha's weeping. He survived, but each day became a new battle. Still, Curtis never gave up. On November 15th, 1990, he requested a microphone to be placed near his mouth. Lying flat, lungs weak, racked with pain, he sang in short phrases. Each note was a defiant message to fate, a testament that his spirit had not been broken. The accident took more than his body. It pushed his entire family to the brink. Curtom Records, already in trouble, collapsed in March 1991. On April 10th, Altha faced a $75,000 medical bill. She sold their last car. Their 6 children watched their mother work 16-hour days cleaning and selling goods just to hold the household together. On July 18th, 1992, Altha and their eldest son, Todd, had a fierce argument over whether to sell the licensing rights to Superfly to cover the debts. Todd shouted that it was his father's lifeblood. Curtis, lying nearby, heard everything but could not speak. After the fight, he gripped Altha's hand, his eyes red and filled with silent apology. On October 5th, 1993, Their youngest daughter, only 15, ran away from home after an argument. Altha found her 3 days later, curled up in a park. But the damage was done. Curtis sank into deeper depression. Charity concerts, like the one held in Chicago in August 1994, provided only partial relief. On February 12, 1996, Curtis learned that a former business partner had embezzled $20,000 from the Superfly revenue. The emotional wound deepened. At the 1994 Grammy Awards, When People Get Ready was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and Curtis was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award. He could only watch on a flickering TV screen inside his quiet hospital room in Roswell. Though paralyzed, his eyes still held pride and pain. On June 15, 1995, Curtis began recording New World Order. His bedroom became a studio. He sang in broken phrases, breathing through oxygen tubes. On August 10th, after a failed take due to chest pain, Curtis wept. He felt like he had lost himself. Altha wiped his tears and whispered that the world still needed his voice. But another tragedy struck. On July 15, 1995, before the album was complete, an electrical short caused a fire in their basement. The blaze destroyed dozens of handwritten compositions, lost gems from his days with the Impressions. Curtis, unable to move, smelled the smoke and heard the glass shatter. Tears streamed down his face as he realized what was gone. The basement turned to ashes. The house still stood, but that fire consumed part of Curtis's soul. After hundreds of hours of pain, the album was finally completed in March 1996. On April 5th, as he listened to the final mix, Curtis smiled faintly, but a fever from infection caused him to lose consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital again, once more fighting between life and death, and from that moment, the final chapter quietly began. A death in tragedy. By December 1999, Curtis's health had entered a critical phase. Over a decade of living with diabetes had devastated his nervous and immune systems. Being paralyzed made him vulnerable to severe skin and respiratory infections. Deep, unhealing sores had formed across his back. Each time nurses turned his body, the flesh tore open again. On December 8, 1999, in Roswell, Curtis developed a high fever above 40 degrees Celsius. His breathing grew shallow, his chest tightened. Altha sensed something was terribly wrong and called an ambulance immediately. Within 10 minutes, Curtis was in the emergency room at North Fulton Regional Hospital. His body weighed just 43 kilograms. He was pale, covered in wounds. Machines surrounded his bed, helping him breathe, circulate blood, digest nutrients, and drain fluids. Each breath was a battle. Altha Todd, Sharon, and Tracy remained by his side day and night. They held hands to stop themselves from crying, knowing that if they wept, Curtis would see it. He remained conscious, though he could no longer speak. Only his hollow eyes still communicated, a gaze that held both tenderness and an unspoken apology. By December 23rd, Curtis had begun slipping in and out of consciousness. On Christmas morning, his heart rate slowed. The ventilator hissed as it tried to keep each second alive. At 7:22 a.m. on December 26, 1999, a long, steady beep from the monitor broke the silence. Curtis Mayfield, had taken his final breath. The doctor confirmed the cause: multiple organ failure due to sepsis, respiratory failure, and diabetes-related complications. All of it traced back to the 9 years of paralysis. Altha collapsed beside the bed, wrapping her arms around her husband's still body, crying out his name. Sharon screamed as if her tears might call his spirit back. But Curtis was gone. Quietly, just as he had endured all those years in darkness without complaint. News of his death spread quickly. That evening, a radio station in Atlanta stopped all programming to play "We're a Winner" and "Move On." Up on repeat across America, people who had grown up with his music turned on their radios and lowered their heads in silence. Not because a celebrity had died, but because a piece of their soul had gone with his voice, a secret archive never revealed. Among the remaining belongings in the basement of the Roswell home where Curtis Mayfield had lived, his final years, a scorched and moldy box, was found behind a broken brick wall. No one believed what they saw inside. It was a set of detailed records from a scholarship fund under Curtis's name during the 1960s. The documents showed that as many as 770 African-American students had once been beneficiaries of the program. There had never been a press conference about the fund. No journalists were ever invited to report it. It had existed quietly, just like Curtis himself, silent, steady, and never asking for gratitude. But the shock was not that the fund existed. It was in what had been lost. The lower half of the recipient lists had been burned. Names were missing. Budget figures had been scratched out. On a torn piece of paper, someone had scrawled a single haunting question: who cut the funding? In silence. No one answered, and no one investigated. The fund disappeared at the same time. Curtis faced severe financial struggles following his paralysis. Some surviving documents suggested that the money had been diverted through unnamed intermediaries. There were forged signatures, offshore bank accounts. The flow of funds was abruptly cut off. Students never received their promised scholarships. A program once created to sustain hope was erased from history as if it had never existed. One of the most intact pages was a handwritten thank you letter from a freshman at Howard University, written in blue ink and addressed to Mr. M. The writer said that without the scholarship, he would have remained a warehouse worker instead of stepping onto a college campus. The letter had never been opened. It lay hidden between half-burnt pages, a heartbreaking piece of evidence that someone had once been touched by compassion but was ultimately forgotten. A former production assistant of Mayfield later admitted to seeing ignored internal audit requests and unusual payments routed through untraceable companies. But while Curtis was alive, he never spoke out. Perhaps he did not want to become a public victim. Perhaps he believed that silence would preserve the good, but that silence became part of the disappearance of a legacy that was quiet, yet no less noble. Some believe Curtis was betrayed. Others think he quietly accepted it, not wanting to cause a stir, or perhaps because he no longer had the strength to fight. But the question remains like a knife embedded in the center of his legacy. Why was one of the greatest things he ever did deliberately made to vanish? An imperfect family. The life of Curtis Mayfield was not just a collection of timeless melodies. It was a long thread woven between music and complex human relationships. He was married twice and fathered his children, a large family, but not always a close one. The women who passed through Curtis's life, from wives to lovers, once loved him passionately, but many had also cried quietly, feeling left behind in the shadow of his fame. Alpha Mayfield, his final wife, and the silent presence through his bedridden years, was not the first woman to enter his life, but she was the only one who stayed until the end. She witnessed the breakdown of previous relationships and had once overheard one of Curtis's children say he was a great artist but a distant father. Some of his children lived scattered across the United States, bearing different last names. Some were never seen in public. One child grew up with only a vinyl record to know who their father was. Another had cried silently, watching him receive a Grammy, knowing they had never been held in his arms, not even once. Curtis was not an ideal father. He wrote songs for the world, but he didn't always listen to his own family. Tours, studio sessions, and the burden of being a symbol consumed most of his life. What remained were children, raised on fragments of memory. When Curtis died, not all his children were present. Some arrived late, some stayed silent, and some names were mentioned only in the obituary. The legacy that remains. Curtis Mayfield was more than an artist. He was a message, a burning torch in the dark divide of America. His music wasn't just heard, it was felt, and once felt, it could never be forgotten. Songs like People Get Ready, Keep on Pushing, and Move on Up still echo through protests today, as if Curtis himself was standing there among the crowd, whispering each word into the ears of a new generation. Even when he lost the ability to move, even when disease took away his voice, Curtis never let go. Even lying still in a cold hospital room, he kept writing, kept recording, and kept believing that music could save. It was a spirit that didn't need a stage. It only needed a soul unwilling to go quiet. And perhaps Curtis's greatest legacy isn't in the Grammy Awards or the Billboard charts. It is in the millions of hearts that once looked up when they heard him sing. In every black child who for the first time realized they had the right to dream, to sing, and to live. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you found value in what Curtis Mayfield left behind, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring story. We'll see you again soon.